the dry wind and the silent porch. The wind moved slow across the plains, dry and whispering, the way it always had for decades. Old wooden fences groaned softly as the breeze touched them, and the brittle grass swayed like it remembered something it had long forgotten. Far from the city, tucked at the edge of nowhere, sat a farm most people didn't know existed. It was not big, not fancy, just land and history, held together by a tired roof and stubborn memories. On the front porch of the farmhouse sat a 93-year-old woman named Ethel Mae Dawson. Her hands were calloused and spotted, her back slightly hunched, but her eyes still burned with something fierce, something untamed. She had lived on this farm since she was 8 years old. Her father built the barn with his bare hands, and her mother planted every tree that now leaned old and bent beside the fields. The place was more than home. It was her life's story, written in soil. Ethel didn't have family left. No husband, no children. The neighbors had all sold their land or passed away, and the nearest town had become a shell of itself. But Ethel stayed, not out of fear or stubbornness, but out of love. She believed that the land remembered kindness, and she wasn't ready to say goodbye. But kindness doesn't keep everyone away. It started with tire tracks in the dirt road that no one should have been using. Ethel saw them one morning as she fed the chickens. They were wide, thick grooves, too big for any regular car, and they were fresh. Then came the notes. Handwritten, left in her mailbox unsigned. The messages were always short and cruel. You can't stay forever. Land's too old, so are you. We'll make you leave. Ethel didn't blink. She burned each note in the stove without a word. But the next week, 3 men on motorcycles rode up while she was hanging laundry. They didn't speak at first, just sat on their bikes and watched her with dark glasses and idle grins. She pretended not to notice, but her hands were trembling as she clipped the final shirt to the line. "Nice place, Grandma," one of them finally said, his voice sharp like broken glass. "Shame if it..." collapsed. Ethel turned slowly. Her voice was calm. "You boys, lost?" The second man chuckled. "No, ma'am. We're exactly where we need to be. You're the one a little out of place. Time's up." She didn't reply. She stared at them, steady as stone, and walked back inside her house without another word. The men didn't follow. Not that day, but that night, she heard gunshots in the distance. 2, maybe 3. And then a fire started in the field near the east fence. It burned fast, swallowing dry grass and licking at the sky like a beast finally set free. Ethel called the volunteer fire department, but they were over an hour away, so she grabbed her coat, a flashlight, and the old water hose and fought the fire herself. By morning, the fire was out, but so was the field. Black earth stretched like a scar. The smell of smoke still hung in the air. She leaned against her porch rail and stared at the damage, not crying. She hadn't cried in 20 years. That was when she heard the sound of an engine. Not rough like a motorcycle. Smooth. Steady. A black truck pulled up, coated in dust from the long road behind. The man who stepped out looked like he belonged in a movie. Tall, quiet, wearing dark clothes and eyes that carried weight like rain clouds. Ethel squinted. "You here to finish the job?" The man shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just passing through. Saw the fire. Thought I'd check if anyone needed help." Ethel eyed him for a long time before nodding toward the empty chair beside hers. "You looking for coffee or trouble?" "Just coffee," he replied, and his voice was gentle, like a river that didn't brag about its depth. He sat down beside her. They didn't talk for a few minutes, just listened to the wind again, now cooler, calmer. "What's your name?" she finally asked. "Keanu. That short for anything?" "Just Keanu." They both chuckled a little. After a few sips of coffee and a quiet conversation about weather and wheat, Keanu stood up. "Someone's trying to scare you," he said. "I ain't scared," she answered. "You should be," he said. "They're not gonna stop. They're gonna come back. Next time might not be a warning." "Then I'll still be here," she said. "I always am." Keanu looked across the burned field. "Mind if I stay a few days? Help out? Rebuild the fence? Check the land?" Ethel didn't answer right away. She just watched him, then finally nodded once. "All right, Mr. Keanu, but you better know how to hammer straight." What neither of them saw was the drone hovering far above them, quietly taking photos, sending images to someone watching from a dark room in town. Someone who smiled as he said into the phone, "He's here. The actor. The idiot. This just got interesting." And so the stage was set. Not for a simple story of kindness, but a battle between greed and legacy. And a man whose silence had more power than most men's rage. Shadows in the cornfield. The morning after Keanu's unexpected arrival began with a sharp chill in the air, the kind that wrapped around your bones and whispered warnings through the leaves. Dawn painted the sky with pale orange streaks, and the silence of the land felt heavier than usual. Keanu rose before the sun, stepping out into the field with purpose, his boots sinking slightly into the ash-covered soil. Beside him, Ethel held a steaming mug of tea, watching the horizon with the eyes of someone who had seen far more than she ever told. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not empty, but filled with understanding. He had only been there a few hours, yet it already felt as if some unspoken thread had tied him to that land. Keanu spent most of that morning assessing the damage to the fence, running his fingers along splintered wood, tracing scorch marks where the fire had licked up from the ground. He found boot prints too, fresh ones, deep in the soft soil near the back of the barn, far from where any visitor would naturally walk. Someone had been prowling in the dark. Ethel watched from her kitchen window as Keanu moved through the space with a calm that came from discipline, not fear. He didn't ask her about the prints. He simply returned to the shed, pulled out tools that hadn't been used in years, and began to rebuild. Every strike of his hammer echoed like defiance. By mid-afternoon, he had finished repairing the first stretch of fence and was stacking timber for the next when a car appeared at the end of the driveway. It was a sleek silver sedan that didn't belong on a dirt road. Two men in suits stepped out, both with clean shoes and clipped hair, out of place in the dust and weeds. They didn't look at Keanu. They walked straight up to the porch where Ethel sat, her shawl wrapped tight around her frail shoulders. The taller man pulled out a small folder and said, "Mrs. Dawson, we represent Ridgepoint Developments. We're offering to purchase your land for a fair price. You're sitting on potential. Resorts, golf courses. You'll have enough to retire in comfort." Ethel didn't flinch. She had heard these offers before. "You calling this old place potential is like calling a church a business. You don't get it." The man smiled, tight and polished. "We understand sentiment, but things are changing. People are moving in. This area is going to grow, with or without your blessing." "Then grow without me," she replied, his voice cooled. "That wouldn't be wise, not in your condition. Things happen on farms, fires, accidents." Keanu stepped up behind them, silent and tall. "Did you just threaten her?" Both men turned, startled to see him so close. The second man sneered. "And who are you?" "Just a guest," Keanu said, meeting their gaze. "But I'm staying a while." The two men exchanged looks. The taller one stepped back, tucking the folder under his arm. "Think about the offer," he said. "We'll be back, and next time we'll come with more than words." They drove off, tires kicking up angry clouds of dust behind them. Keanu watched until the car disappeared beyond the rise. He turned to Ethel. "They've got money and power, and now they're getting desperate." Ethel's lips thinned. "I ain't afraid of suits. It's the ones who don't talk that worry me." Keanu didn't respond. That night he set up a cot in the barn, keeping his distance from the house. Not out of politeness, but because he knew what was coming. He kept the lantern low and the shotgun close, though he hoped not to use it. The stars above blinked like distant witnesses, and the wind rustled through the crops like the breath of something ancient. Just after midnight, a sharp whistle echoed through the fields. Then the crunch of footsteps. Keanu rose without sound, his shadow melting into the darkness. Outside, two men were moving through the rows of corn. One carried a crowbar, the other a gas can. They whispered, laughing softly, thinking they were unseen. Keanu stepped behind the first man like a ghost. He spoke quietly. "You missed your turn." The man spun around, eyes wide. "Who?" Keanu grabbed the crowbar, twisted it from the man's hand, and used it to knock the gas can from the second man's grip. The can hit the ground, spilling fuel onto the dry dirt. The stench was sharp and dangerous. One of them pulled a knife. Keanu didn't blink. He moved like water, dodging the blade, knocking the man back into the corn. The second one tried to run, but Keanu caught him by the shirt and slammed him into a wooden post. Not to hurt him, but to make him listen. "You tell whoever sent." "You," Keanu said calmly. "This land isn't up for sale. And if you come back again, you better be ready for more than a scare." The men scrambled away, bruised and shaken, vanishing into the shadows. The next morning, Ethel served him eggs and toast like it was any other day. She didn't ask what happened. But as she passed the plate, she whispered, "You got hands that know pain. You ever done this before?" Keanu looked at her, his voice soft. "Too many times." Later that afternoon, a black envelope arrived in the mailbox. No stamp, no address, just one line, scrawled in red ink. "We warned you." Ethel's hands trembled slightly as she read it. Keanu took the envelope, folded it, and put it in his pocket. "They're escalating." She nodded, her voice a whisper. "They're not trying to buy anymore. They're trying to break me." Keanu stared out across the field. "Then let's make sure you don't break." They didn't know it yet, but the men behind Ridgepoint Developments weren't just businessmen. They were connected to something darker, something that didn't care about land or history or kindness. And they weren't done. Not by a long shot. As the sun dipped low, casting golden shadows across the burned fence line, Ethel and Keanu stood together, two souls from different worlds, bound now by a promise unspoken. And far beyond the hills, in a glass tower in the city, a man in a suit watched the footage from the drone again. He zoomed in on Keanu's face and whispered, "What are you really doing here?" He tapped his phone, called someone in a southern accent, and said, "Bring in the brothers. Let's end this the old-fashioned way." And just like that, the real storm began to roll in. The brothers arrived 3 days past under a strange silence, the kind of silence that made birds stop singing and the air feel heavier than it should. Keanu stayed busy fixing fences, checking locks, clearing brush from the barn wall, and watching the tree line beyond the fields with quiet alertness. He didn't talk much, and Ethel didn't ask questions. They shared meals, repaired old tools, and sometimes just sat on the porch watching clouds roll by. It was a rhythm born from survival, not comfort, like two soldiers waiting out a siege. But even in the stillness, something began to grow. Trust, respect. A sense of shared duty neither of them had expected to find again so late in life. Ethel, once so used to solitude, found herself humming old hymns again while cooking. Keanu, usually a shadow in motion, began to smile when she told stories about her youth, about dancing under the moonlight during harvest festivals, and the time her father wrestled a wild bull with nothing but a rope and stubborn pride. The house felt less haunted with him there. Yet beneath that warmth, the fear never truly left. It waited, curled like smoke under floorboards, waiting for nightfall. On the fourth morning, the brothers arrived. They came not with words or paper, but with noise and menace. 3 motorcycles roared down the road, louder than thunder, tearing through the dust like hounds unleashed. Behind them trailed an old pickup truck with its tailgate chained shut and windows blacked out. The men on the bikes were unlike the polished suits from before. They wore leather tattoos crawling up their necks and smiles that meant harm. Their leader, a man called Remy, had a scar across his cheek shaped like a lightning bolt, and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen mercy in years. Keanu was in the barn when he heard them, but he didn't rush. He finished hammering a nail into the beam before stepping outside, wiping his hands on an old rag. The brothers parked in a half-circle near the porch, boots hitting the ground like drum beats. Remy stepped forward first, arms crossed, eyes locked on Keanu. "Heard you were playing cowboy," Remy said, voice rough like gravel. "Thought we'd come see the show." Ethel stood on the porch, unmoving, holding a cane not for walking, but for defense if it came to that. Keanu stood between them and her, not tense, not aggressive, just present, solid. "You're trespassing," he said calmly. Remy laughed. "Funny word for a man on someone else's land. What are you, bodyguard?" Hired hand? Keanu shook his head. Just a friend. Well, friend, Remy said, stepping closer. We're not here for tea. We're here for her answer. And if it's still no, we might take something else instead. His eyes slid toward the barn, then the house. His message was clear. Keanu nodded once. Then you should know, if you take one step further, you won't leave the same. For a moment, everything froze. The wind stopped. The birds went silent. The dust hung in the air like time itself was holding its breath. Then one of the bikers moved. Just a twitch. Hand to belt. Keanu reacted first. He stepped forward fast, knocking the man's arm away before the weapon could clear the holster. Driving his elbow into the biker's ribs, the man fell hard, groaning. The wind knocked from his lungs. The others rushed in. Remy drew a knife, spinning it with practiced ease, but Keanu ducked his swing and swept his legs, sending him crashing into the dirt. Fists flew, boots slammed, into gravel, and within seconds the yard became a war zone. Keanu moved like he had trained for years. Every strike controlled, every movement precise. He didn't just fight to win. He fought to protect, to send a message. When it ended, the ground was littered with groaning bodies. Blood mixed with dust. Keanu stood tall, a bruise forming on his jaw but eyes burning steady. Remy coughed, crawling backward toward his bike. You don't know who you're messing with. I think I do, Keanu said, and I think you're losing. Remy spat blood, wiped his mouth and growled, This ain't over. He mounted his bike with shaking hands, the others stumbling behind him. The truck backed away quickly, tires spinning in panic. Within moments they were gone, swallowed by the long road and the smell of gasoline. Ethel walked down the porch steps slowly. Her cane clicked against each wooden stair. She reached Keanu and looked up at him, her voice a mix of awe and sadness. I thought you were just a traveler, a man passing through. I was, he replied, until I saw what they were doing. I can't walk away from that. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. You remind me of my husband. He died protecting this land too. That night they sat by the fire pit behind the barn. Keanu stared into the flames, silent until he finally spoke. I was in the military once, he said. Before acting, before all of it. Special operations. Did things I don't like to remember. After I left, I tried to find peace. Quiet, but it always finds me again. People like Remy. People who think power comes from fear. Ethel placed a hand gently on his. Sometimes peace ain't a place. It's a choice. Keanu looked at her and smiled softly. Maybe this is the place I finally make that choice. She chuckled. Then we better fix the chicken coop tomorrow. Fox got in last week. But peace would not come easy. Later that night, as the fire burned low and the stars turned overhead, a black car pulled up in front of a warehouse on the edge of the nearest town. Remy stepped out, bruised and furious. Inside, he met with a man in a tailored coat, a silver ring on his finger, and eyes that saw through lies. You failed, the man said coldly. Remy slammed a fist on the table. He's not just some farmhand, he's trained, he's dangerous. So are we, the man replied. But this time we don't send bikers, we send professionals. Remy narrowed his eyes. You're calling them in? Yes, said the man. If he wants to protect the land, let him try. He'll soon learn what it costs. And with that, the next wave of shadows began to move, calmer, colder, and far more deadly than the ones before. Ghosts with new names. The morning was quiet again, but the kind of quiet that didn't bring peace. It was like the land was holding its breath, waiting for something. The sun came up late behind a wall of thick clouds, casting a pale silver light across the broken fence line and the black scars still clinging to the field from the fire days before. Ethel made breakfast like always, oatmeal, boiled eggs, and weak coffee, but her hands moved slower. Something in her gut told her the storm wasn't over. And inside the barn, Keanu was already awake, already packing. He didn't tell her why, but his bag wasn't filled with clothes or food. It was filled with old things, maps, a locked box, a folded photo, and something wrapped in dark cloth. He moved like a man who knew what was coming, a man who had seen this pattern before. He stepped outside and looked at the tree line beyond the fence. Nothing moved, but the silence pressed on his shoulders like weight. Later that afternoon, while repairing a roof panel near the tool shed, Keanu heard a sound that didn't belong. A single bird's cry cut short, followed by the soft crunch of leaves under careful boots. He dropped his hammer slowly and reached for the small mirror he had placed near the gutter, something only trained men did. In the reflection, he saw them. 3 figures dressed in dark gray, no patches, no marks, moving through the field with the precision of wolves. Not bikers, not businessmen, something else entirely. Keanu climbed down, wiped his hands, and walked into the house. "Ethel," he said gently, "we have to talk." She looked up from her knitting, her eyes sharper than they had been all week. "They're back?" "Not the same ones," he said. "These ones don't leave bruises, they leave silence." Ethel stood slowly. "You know them?" "Not by name," Keanu said, "but I know the type. I used to work beside men like that. Black contracts, mercenaries, no conscience, just objectives. And if they're here, it means the people behind this land grab or finished pretending. Now they're going for erasure." Ethel didn't blink. She stepped into her bedroom and came out with a small box wrapped in red velvet. She handed it to Keanu and said, "Open it." Inside was a medal. Old, tarnished, but heavy with meaning. Keanu recognized it immediately. "Your husband was military," he said quietly. 27 years, she replied. "He taught me how to shoot, how to patch a wound, how to stand tall when your knees are shaking. And he told me, when the day comes that evil wears a friendly face, don't hesitate." Keanu nodded. "Then let's not hesitate." They spent the next few hours preparing, not with panic but with method. Keanu taught Ethel how to use the shotgun again. She surprised him with how steady her hands were. He blocked the rear door with furniture, reinforced the barn doors, and placed mirrors at key spots around the porch and fields. Not to spy, but to track movement. He used flour to dust the floors inside, making it easier to spot intruders. Everything was done with quiet efficiency. They spoke less and less. It was like a current had taken over, pulling them forward. As dusk approached, Keanu stepped out toward the tool shed once more, but something made him stop. The wind had changed. Not cooler, not warmer, just wrong. He looked up and saw it. A drone, not like the last one. This one was silent, matte black, circling like a vulture. He grabbed a shovel and smashed it from the sky before it could rise again. But the damage had been done. They knew he was still there. Night fell fast, too fast, and with it came the cold. Not the kind that made you reach for a coat, but the kind that made you want to light every lamp, shut every door, and pray for morning. Ethel sat near the fire, staring into it, and said softly, "They'll come tonight, won't they?" Keanu nodded. "Yes, and it won't be loud. It'll be precise." Around 11, the silence broke. Not with engines, not with voices, but with a sudden cut to the power. The house went dark, and even the backup generator refused to hum. The land around them turned to ink. Keanu moved instantly, grabbing his flashlight, switching it to red light, and taking position near the kitchen. Ethel was already crouched behind the armchair, her shotgun across her lap, her breath slow and even. The first window shattered without warning. Keanu dove low, rolled behind the dining table, and waited. He could hear soft footsteps across the porch, 1, 2, 3. Then silence. Then the sound of a back door handle being turned slowly. He moved fast. The door swung open and a figure stepped in, silenced pistol in hand, but Keanu was already there. He struck with a heavy wooden stool, catching the man's arm and sending the weapon flying. They struggled in silence, brutal and fast. Keanu disarmed him, twisted his wrist, and knocked him unconscious against the fridge without firing a shot. Another entered from the front window, only to be met with Ethel's shaking but steady aim. The shotgun roared once, loud and furious, and the figure dropped before he ever reached the hallway. But the third, he was smarter. He circled around to the barn, cut through the side wall with a blade, and moved toward the house from behind. He didn't rush. He had patience. And he carried something more dangerous than a gun. He carried a device, a transmitter. Keanu caught him just in time, only because of the flower trail near the shed. The footsteps were too clean, too light. He followed them, silent as breath, and tackled the man near the propane tank. The fight that followed wasn't fast. It was long. It was violent. Two trained men locked in a deadly, wordless argument, surrounded by chickens and ghosts. Keanu won, but barely. He returned to the house, face bloodied, shoulder dislocated, breath shallow. Ethel ran to him, helped him inside, and said, "You need a hospital." "No time," he grunted. "They'll send more." "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking for the first time. "Why is this land so important? It's just dirt." Keanu looked at her with a grim expression and said, "It's not just land. Underneath this farm there's a vein of rare minerals, the kind used in military tech. Someone leaked a map. The company bidding for your property doesn't want to build a resort. They want to strip the ground, sell the resources, and walk away." Ethel's eyes widened. "But I never knew. They were counting on that," he said. "And on your silence." That night, as they treated wounds and buried the bodies in the far field, neither of them spoke much. Something had changed, not just in their safety but in their hearts. They weren't just protecting history now. They were protecting truth, and hundreds of miles away, in a boardroom lit by soft blue lights, the man with the silver ring listened as his phone buzzed again. "Report failed," the voice said. "Target survived. Drone lost. Team neutralized." The man didn't flinch. He simply picked up a pen, signed a document, and said, "Send the final option. Burn it all if you have to." And so, the fire that had once scorched the field was nothing compared to what was now on its way. The fire line, the days after the attack passed like slow thunder, rumbling beneath every second. Nothing seemed to move, and yet everything had changed. The barn smelled of gun oil and burned straw. The house creaked louder, not from age but from memory. The windows were boarded, the doors reinforced, and the quiet was now a living thing, crawling along the floorboards, whispering that the worst had not yet come. Ethel walked slower. Keanu slept lighter. Neither said it, but they knew the next storm wouldn't come with bikers or suits. It would come with fire, steel, and no intention of leaving survivors. Ethel sat at her kitchen table, slowly flipping through an old photo album. Each page was a memory she had kept hidden behind stronger walls than wood. Her wedding photo, her father standing with a rifle in front of the barn, her husband holding their baby girl who never made it past 10. The past had always stayed in its place, locked behind yellowed paper and quiet tears. But now it was sitting in the room with her, breathing her air, asking for strength she didn't know if she had left. Keanu sat across from her, his arm in a makeshift sling, eyes fixed on a map spread across the table. Not just the property, lines, but the land beneath it. Topography, mineral deposits, access trails, water routes. He had pulled data from an encrypted satellite phone hidden in the locked box he had carried with him since the beginning. And now, for the first time, he showed Ethel what the company really wanted. A rich hidden vein of rare earth elements that stretched from under her house to the hills behind the wheat field. Millions of dollars buried in silence. And she had been sleeping above it her entire life. Ethel didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the map, then slowly said, "They'll never stop, will they?" Keanu shook his head. "Not until this place is nothing but a pit, or until they believe it's too costly to take." She closed the album, pushing it aside. "Then we better make it costly." As the sun dipped below the horizon that night, the land took on a new kind of stillness. Not the stillness of peace, but the stillness before a storm. A kind of unnatural pause, where even the wind seemed to wait for permission to move. Then it came. From the hills beyond the field, trucks appeared, silent, their lights off, engines humming low like predators waiting to pounce. Men in tactical gear stepped out, faces hidden behind black helmets, rifles strapped across their backs. They didn't speak. They moved like they had done this before. Because they had. These weren't hired thugs. They were contractors trained for destruction in silence, and their orders were clear. Take the land, erase resistance, and leave no record. Keanu saw them first, through the scope of a borrowed hunting rifle perched in the hayloft of the barn. He counted 13, maybe more, fanning out in a crescent, toward the house. He tapped his earpiece, signaling Ethel, who was crouched behind the cellar door with a flare gun and 2 propane tanks wired for a last resort. This wasn't just defense anymore. This was survival. As the first 2 men approached the front porch, Keanu fired. Not to kill, to warn. The bullet struck the ground inches from their boots. They stopped, raised their rifles, and returned fire. Wood splintered around the windows. The porch railing shattered. Inside, Ethel stayed calm, lighting a wick with hands that had once sewn dresses and buried her daughter. Now they lit explosives. Keanu moved quickly through the rafters, using every shadow, every broken beam to shift position. He fired again, this time striking the leg of a man trying to breach the back door. Screams filled the night, but they weren't loud. They were tight, professional. These men didn't panic, they adapted. Within moments, 2 of them circled toward the barn, cutting through the side door like the others before. But Keanu had learned from the last time. He met them head-on, dropping from the hayloft with a blade in one hand and a hammer in the other. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fast. It was brutal. By the time it ended, both men lay unconscious, their gear stripped, their radios tossed into the water trough. Back at the house, flames suddenly erupted from the far field. A flare had been launched, not by Ethel, but by the attackers. And in response, gasoline-soaked torches lit up the night like a funeral pyre. The wheat field, dry and brittle, caught fire instantly. The flames moved fast, pushed by a cruel wind heading straight for the farmhouse. Ethel's voice cracked through the earpiece. "They're trying to burn us out." Keanu raced back toward the house, breath tight in his chest. He could already feel the heat. He reached the porch just as 3 more men moved in from the east, one with a firebomb in hand. Keanu tackled him mid-throw, sending the device rolling across the ground where it exploded harmlessly. The others turned to fire, but Ethel stepped from the shadows behind the shed, shotgun raised and fired once. Then again. She didn't miss. Keanu dragged her back into the house, smoke curling in through the broken windows. "We can't hold this much longer," he said. Ethel nodded. "Then we don't." She opened a floor panel beneath the rug and revealed a tunnel, an old storm shelter from decades ago, leading out toward the creek. Keanu looked at her with surprise, and she smiled through the ash. "My husband built it. Just in case. Now feels like just in case." They climbed down just as the fire reached the porch, swallowing it in angry flames. Through a vent, Keanu watched the men regroup, their radios crackling with frustration. They hadn't expected this much resistance. They hadn't expected traps or tunnels or a 93-year-old woman with the heart of a lion. Keanu touched Ethel's shoulder gently. "We can still run." She shook her head. "No. We survive. Then we fight." Down in the dark, while the house burned above them, Keanu pulled out the folded photo from his bag. It was a picture of his sister, killed by a private military team during a mining protest overseas. He had never told Ethel. He had never told anyone. But now, in the silence of the earth, with fire lighting the cracks above them, he said softly, "I came here by accident, but I stayed for her. And for you." Ethel reached over and squeezed his hand. "Then let's make this count." By morning, the house was nothing but smoke and charred timber. The attackers searched the ruins, thinking it over. They didn't know about the tunnel. Not yet. They thought the job was done. They reported it as complete. But beneath the ground, in the cool silence of the old storm shelter, Keanu opened a laptop with a satellite uplink and hit send. Files, coordinates, photos, everything he had gathered. It went straight to journalists, to government oversight, to watchdogs, and far away, the man with the silver ring received a call from his assistant. "We have a problem," the assistant said. He exposed everything. The man clenched his jaw. Then finish it. I want both of them gone. But what he didn't know was that they were already gone, and already planning their return. Land that remembers, the world had already begun to shift by the time Keanu and Ethel crawled out of the storm tunnel and into the cover of the dry creek bed. The sun was just starting to rise behind the smoke that still hovered in the sky like a warning. The farmhouse was gone, burned down to ash and broken beams, but it wasn't gone in their hearts. Not for Keanu, not for Ethel. And soon, it wouldn't be gone in the eyes of the world either. Because the files Keanu had sent before the fire, photos of the attackers, the minerals hidden beneath the land, the private contracts signed by men in suits who thought no one was watching. Those files had reached people who cared. Journalists, senators, lawyers, veterans, even a few good men from the Bureau who had once served beside Keanu in wars that never made the news. Now they all knew. Keanu and Ethel made their way through the tall grass, keeping low, keeping quiet. They moved like ghosts who had returned from the grave not to haunt, but to reclaim what had been stolen. They had a plan now. It wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about showing the world what truth looked like when you stood tall, even in the face of fire. By noon, a group of locals had arrived. Not with guns or violence, but with cameras, microphones, and questions. The story had spread like wildfire on social media. Elderly woman's home torched by land developers. Former soldier exposes corporate land grab. It had started as whispers. Now it was headlines, and people came. Farmers from nearby counties, war veterans, journalists in dusty shoes. Even the mayor, who once ignored Ethel's letters, now stood on her blackened lawn with tears in his eyes. Ethel, her hair still covered in soot, stood on what remained of her front porch and spoke. Her voice cracked at first but gained strength with each word. They thought this land was just dirt, she said. But this land remembers. It remembers every seed my mother planted, every fence post my father drove into the ground, every tear I cried when I buried my husband right under that oak tree, and it remembers what happened here. So will you. So will everyone. A silence followed. Not empty. Full. Full of weight. Full of truth. And then, applause. Slow at first, then louder. People clapped not just for her, but for what she stood. For Keanu stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes focused. He didn't need the spotlight. He had never wanted it. But he had a mission left to finish. Later that day, federal agents arrived with warrants. They walked into Ridgepoint Development's offices with hard drives and subpoenas. And the man with the silver ring, who once gave orders like a king, was now the one being questioned, his hands shaking as he watched his empire crack. But justice didn't stop there. A group of young engineers inspired by Ethel's story offered to test the land for clean extraction, methods that wouldn't destroy the farm, wouldn't poison the ground, wouldn't tear apart history. And they promised Ethel they would only proceed if she approved. She didn't say yes right away. She said, "Show me respect first, then we'll talk." Meanwhile, Keanu was asked to speak at a town gathering held just outside what remained of the barn. He stood on a wooden crate, hands in his pockets, quiet for a long time before saying anything. "Some fights aren't about fists or bullets," he said. "They're about standing still when others want you gone. They're about saying no even when it hurts. This land isn't mine. This story isn't mine. But I was lucky enough to be part of it. And if it's taught me anything, it's this. Kindness is not weakness. Resilience is not noise. And silence, and when used right, is louder than war." When he finished, people didn't just clap. They cried. Keanu didn't stay much longer after that. He packed his things into the same black truck, now scratched and dented, and came to say goodbye. Ethel met him at the gate with a wrapped bundle in her hands. "My husband's jacket," she said softly. "He'd want you to have it." Keanu took it with both hands, nodded once and said, "He'd be proud of you." "So would your sister," Ethel whispered. He blinked, not asking how she knew. Maybe she had always known. Maybe grief speaks its own language. Before he left, she reached up and touched his cheek. "You saved my life," she said. Keanu looked into her eyes and replied, "You saved mine first." Then he drove off down the dusty road, disappearing into the same horizon from which he had come. No medals, no crowds, just the wind following him and the land whispering its thanks. Months passed. The land healed. The grass grew back. Trees bloomed. A new home was built on the same foundation, stronger, humbler, and filled with life. And etched into a stone at the gate was a small plaque that read, "This land remembers those who refuse to be forgotten." And beneath that, in smaller letters, "Dedicated to Ethel Dawson and the stranger who stayed."